Law number 3, the law of perception. Your employer brand only exists in someone else's head. I often catch myself deploying what seem like endless metaphors when I teach people about branding. It's a filter. It's cement blocks we drop in the ocean. It's what people say about us. It's an emotional connection. It's a living organism. A brand is context, or it's the personification of the organization. I know, it's a lot. And I love metaphors. I love them 6.4 times more than most people, and this kind of seems excessive even to me. We all know what a brand is, right? We've been surrounded by them our whole lives. They influence us in ways big and small. Heck, we make a living building and using them. In a way, asking anyone in the modern world what a brand is kind of like asking a fish what water is. We're surrounded by it, we're inundated by it, and we often lose sight of what it really is. Because when you pull the layers back, you start to realize that a brand isn't, anything. It's certainly not something you can see. It's not something you can touch. And for all the time, money, and energy we put into our brands, they aren't even ours. Quote unquote, your brand, that exists exclusively and solely in other people's minds. And while it can be influenced and nudged, that brand is 100% how other people perceive your company, your products, and what it's like to work there. And that makes this law very much a double-edged sword, because as something that isn't really real in any sense of the word, we cannot directly affect it. So how can you be responsible for the brand if you have no direct impact on it? This is a game of influence. And if we add yet another metaphor to the mix, I guess, the brand is a bird's nest. And when building a nest, the bird picks up what it can, where it can. It finds stuff, then it becomes part of the nest, whatever's around it. In a city, the bird might have coffee stirrers and bits of receipt in it. In a forest, the nest might be made of pine needles and twigs. In an open field, it might be made of grass and straw. The only way you can change a bird's nest is to change the materials that are available and accessible to it. Like a bird collecting material for a nest, your brand is made up of all sorts of experiences and touch points that the person had with your brand. You can't change how someone sees your brand, but you can surround them with new messages and proof points. With intention, you can seed the ground with the things that you want to become the new nest. You can't get into the nest and make something new. If you do, the bird will never enter it again because it's no longer the bird's. All you can do is make it easy for the bird to build the nest you want it to make. Now that means changing brand perception can take time. But the good news is once it's set, it takes just as much time to undo it again. But because the brand isn't real, it allows us to expand the parameters of the game in a way that gives us almost infinite options on how to do our work. Options that extend way beyond the logo and the career site. Would changing the script that customer service uses influence people's perception of the brand? Yeah. Would changing the outgoing voicemail message change people's perception? Yeah. And don't worry, I know someone, a very specific person who became interested in a company only because of that outgoing message. So yeah, it's true. Would making sure every interviewee gets a box of cookies delivered to their home change perception? Oh, it sure would. None of these things are classically seen as something employer brand needs to worry about. But when you see that the name of the game is perception influence, you can find so many different ways to influence that perception. Why this works. As we talked about in the law of focus, brands were ways to indicate who made something because we became more and more disconnected from the maker. They started as a kind of reputation mark, a way of indicating that someone who made your last great, amazing shirt also made this shirt too. But what makes a shirt great? Or a horseshoe or a bag of flour? Quality is completely subjective. What makes a great shirt to one isn't important to somebody else. Thus, the brand extends beyond reputation and into perception. Where this falls apart. No less an authority than the American Marketing Association defines brand in terms of physical and visual assets. Your logo, your color, your imagery, your fonts, your style, that sort of thing. I'm sorry, but that isn't a brand. Someone might refer to it as branding, but it's really the visual identity, not a brand. For example, Nike Swoosh is one of the world's best known logos, no question. And when people see it, they think of athleticism, physical achievement, and the glory of winning. And when other people see it, they see, I don't know, an overpriced, overmarketed set of shoes. It's the same logo, but with very different brand perspectives depending on who's looking at it. I bring this up because many people who don't do branding all day long make this false equivalency all the time. They assume an employer brand is your style of writing more than the choice of what it is you weren't writing about. They think the hashtag counts for more than the content it gets attached to. They might make a variation of the logo for you, which is nice, but it ignores what the logo is now supposed to stand for. Don't fall into this trap. The brand exists in a stranger's mind, and it's a place you cannot touch directly. Examples. There was a time when Old Spice was the aftershave your granddad wore. It was a brand signifying a kind of old-school rugged man, probably a fisherman who slapped some of it on just to get rid of the aroma of yesterday's catch of the day. Today, Old Spice has the same logo, same color scheme, the same typography as its seafaring ancestor, but it isn't old school anymore. Whether it's the now classic the man your man could smell like campaign, or the current Smilf confidence ads, which, whatever, this is a brand for a far younger generation. Without changing much of the core brand identity, the company has changed what the brand stands for and how you're likely to think about it. How do they do that? Well, by changing everything surrounding the brand, just like a bird's nest. They change the commercials, the scents, the target audience, the product selection. I mean, remember, Old Spice makes more from deodorant and soap than it does from aftershave, right? They change the language around the product family. Ultimately, what they were trying to do was change people's perceptions by surrounding them with new information reflecting new values.